The deafening crack of gunfire shattered the morning stillness as Grace Donovan dove behind the general store's water trough, clutching her reticule to her chest, and silently cursing her decision to take this shortcut through the dusty little town of Dry Creek, Arizona Territory, 1876. She hadn't expected to find herself caught in the middle of what appeared to be a bank robbery gone wrong, with bullets splintering the wooden awnings overhead and the town marshal shouting for reinforcements. Grace had been traveling west for 3 weeks, leaving behind the ashes of her former life in Boston. At 24, she was neither young enough to be considered a prime marriage prospect nor old enough to resign herself to spinsterhood, especially after the scandal that had followed her father's financial ruin and subsequent death. The promise of a teaching position in California had been her salvation, but now, crouching behind a water trough in a town she'd never meant to visit, she wondered if she would live long enough to reach her destination. "Stay down, madam," a deep voice commanded as a broad-shouldered man slid into position beside her, the leather of his well-worn chaps creaking as he moved. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his Stetson, but she could see the determined set of his jaw, darkened with several days' worth of stubble. A 6-shooter gleamed in his weathered hand. "I had every intention of doing so," Grace replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is this a common occurrence in your town, mister?" "Holt. Hayes Holt," he answered, briefly meeting her eyes before peering around the edge of the trough. His eyes were a startling shade of blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "And no, madam, Dry Creek's usually quiet as a church mouse. These boys picked the wrong day to rob our bank." Another volley of gunfire erupted, and Hayes pulled her closer to the ground, his arm a protective barrier across her shoulders. The scent of leather, horse, and something uniquely male filled her senses. "I need to get you somewhere safer," he muttered. "When I say run, we're heading for that alley." "Ready!" Before Grace could protest that she was most certainly not ready, Hayes shouted, "Now!" And they were running, her skirts gathered in one hand while he kept a firm grip on her arm with the other. They reached the shadowed alley without incident, though Grace's heart pounded as if it might burst through her ribs. "You're not from around here," Hayes observed, holstering his weapon as the sounds of the gunfight moved toward the edge of town. "How very perceptive of you, Mr. Holt," Grace replied, attempting to smooth her travel-worn skirts. "I'm merely passing through on my way to California. California's a fair piece from here, madam, especially for a lady traveling alone." His gaze was assessing but not unkind. "Miss Grace Donovan," she supplied, extending her hand with the proper Boston decorum her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "And I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, thank you." Hayes took her hand, but instead of shaking it as she expected, he lifted it briefly to his lips in a gesture that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Pleasure, Miss Donovan. Seems I owe you an apology for the welcome Dry Creek's given you. Let me escort you somewhere you can rest a spell." "The stagecoach west won't be through until tomorrow." Grace hesitated. Her funds were limited, and she hadn't budgeted for an unexpected stay. "I can see those wheels turning," Hayes said with a slight smile that transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Town's small, but we've got a decent boarding house. Mrs. Peterson's fair with her prices." "I suppose I have little choice in the matter," Grace conceded. As they emerged from the alley, the town appeared to have returned to normal, save for a cluster of men outside the bank, and the marshal leading 2 dust-covered outlaws toward the jailhouse. "Mr. Holt." A young boy's voice called out, and Grace turned to see a child of perhaps 10 years racing toward them, his clothing too large for his thin frame, dark hair flopping into eyes that matched Hayes' remarkable blue. "Jamie," Hayes acknowledged, ruffling the boy's hair. "Everything all right at home?" "Yes, sir, but Lily's crying again and Daniel can't get her to stop. We're awful hungry, too." The boy's eyes darted to Grace curiously. Hayes's expression tightened. "This is Miss Donovan. Miss Donovan, my oldest James." Grace's eyebrows rose. "Your son?" "Yes, madam." "Got 3 of them waiting at home." There was something in his tone that challenged her to comment further. 3 children, she repeated, surprised, and their mother, a shadow passed over Hayes' face. "Been gone near 8 months now. Childbed fever took her after Lily came." Grace's heart constricted at the thought of 3 motherless children. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Holt." Jamie tugged at his father's sleeve. "Pa, you promised we'd eat proper today." Hayes looked down at his son, then back to Grace, an internal struggle evident in his expression. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. "Miss Donovan, I know this is mighty forward of me, but would you consider coming to supper at my place? It's not much, but it's clean, and I've got some stew meat that needs cooking. Seems the least I can do after you nearly got shot on our main street." Grace should have refused. A proper Boston lady would never accept such an invitation from a man she'd just met, but something in the weary lines around Hayes' eyes and the hopeful look on young Jamie's face made her nod. "I would be happy to join you, Mr. Holt. Perhaps I could assist with the preparation. I'm not an accomplished cook, but I can follow directions." Relief washed over Hayes' features. "That'd be mighty kind of you, Miss Donovan." They collected Grace's trunk from the stage coach office, where she'd left it before her ill-fated shortcut, and Hayes loaded it onto his wagon. Jamie clambered up beside his father, while Grace was helped onto the wooden seat, acutely aware of Hayes' strong hands at her waist. The Holt homestead was a modest affair about 2 miles outside of town, a sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral. A vegetable garden, looking somewhat neglected, stretched to one side, while chickens scratched in the yard. 2 more children appeared at the door as the wagon approached. A boy of about 7 with a serious expression, and in his arms a red-faced, fussy infant with wisps of dark hair. "That's Daniel and little Lily," Hayes explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. "Children, mind your manners, we have a guest." Daniel regarded Grace solemnly. "Can you make Lily stop crying, madam? I've tried everything." Grace climbed down from the wagon with Hayes' assistance and approached the children. "May I?" she asked, holding her arms out for the baby. Daniel relinquished his sister with evident relief. Lily's face was hot against Grace's palm as she cradled her, noting the child's discomfort. "She might be teething," Grace suggested, recalling her younger siblings' similar distress years ago. "Do you have any cloves, Mr. Holt? Or perhaps some cool cloth for her gums?" Hayes looked momentarily lost. "I don't rightly know. Martha always handled those things." The mention of his late wife hung in the air between them. Grace shifted Lily to her hip and summoned her most reassuring smile. "Well then, let's see what we can find. Jamie, perhaps you could show me the kitchen." The interior of the cabin was simply furnished but, as Hayes had promised, clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a rough-hewn table with benches in the center. 2 doors presumably led to sleeping quarters. What was immediately apparent, however, was the strain of a household missing its woman's touch. Mending was piled on a chair, dishes stacked haphazardly on shelves, and despite Hayes' obvious efforts, a layer of dust covered the mantel. "I apologize for the state of things," Hayes said quietly, catching her assessment. "We make do." "No need to apologize. You've managed admirably with 3 little ones," Grace replied sincerely, bouncing Lily gently as she examined the kitchen stores. The pantry revealed meager supplies: a small sack of flour, some beans, the promised stew meat, and little else. Grace frowned. "Jamie mentioned you were all hungry. Have you not eaten today?" Hayes' jaw tightened. "We had some biscuits this morning, been stretching things a bit lately." Ranch hasn't been doing as well as it should. Understanding dawned on Grace. This wasn't just a supper invitation, the Holts genuinely needed help with a meal. With renewed purpose, she handed Lily back to Daniel and rolled up her sleeves. "Right then. Mr. Holt, if you'd be so kind as to light the stove, I'll see what can be done with these provisions." For the next hour, Grace worked minor miracles in the kitchen. She found wild onions growing near the garden, salvaged some slightly wilted carrots, and used the last of the flour to make dumplings for the stew. Hayes chopped wood for the stove, Jamie fetched water, and Daniel tried to keep Lily entertained with a wooden spoon. As they worked side by side, Grace found herself stealing glances at Hayes. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness in how he handled his children, a patience that spoke of deep love. When their hands accidentally touched as they set the table, the jolt of awareness that shot through her was both unexpected and unsettling. By the time they sat down to eat, the atmosphere had changed. The children's faces were scrubbed clean, the table was set as properly as Grace could manage with mismatched dishes, and the aroma of hot stew filled the cabin. Lily, soothed by a cloth dampened with water and rubbed with a trace of honey Grace had discovered, dozed in a makeshift cradle. "Miss Donovan, would you do us the honor of saying grace?" Hayes asked, his expression sincere. Grace nodded, touched by the request. As they bowed their heads, she offered thanks not only for the food but for safe travels and new acquaintances. The meal was consumed with the enthusiasm of the truly hungry. Grace found herself smiling at Jamie's animated stories about the horses his father was training and Daniel's shy contributions. Hayes watched her interactions with his children, a thoughtful expression on his face. "This is the best eating we've had since Ma died," Jamie declared, reaching for another dumpling. "James," Hayes warned, but Grace shook her head. "It's quite all right, I'm flattered." She turned to Jamie. "Your mother must have been a wonderful cook." "She was," Daniel said quietly. "She made pie sometimes. And she sang to us at night," Jamie added. "Pa tries, but he isn't much good at singing." Hayes chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "That's the honest truth. I sound like a dying coyote, according to the boys." The conversation continued easily through the meal and cleanup. As Grace washed dishes with Daniel's solemn assistance, she was struck by how comfortable she felt in this humble cabin, as if she'd known the Holts for years rather than hours. When the dishes were done, and the children settled with a book Hayes was reading to them, his finger moving laboriously under each word, his deep voice giving life to the tale, Grace stepped outside to catch her breath. The sun was beginning to set, painting the wide Arizona sky in spectacular hues of gold and crimson. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel against the approaching night. The creak of the door announced Hayes' presence before he spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it? Never gets old." "It's magnificent," Grace agreed. "So different from Boston." "That's where you're from then, Boston," Grace nodded. "A different world from this one." "What brings you all the way out to these parts, if you don't mind my asking? Most Eastern ladies aren't keen on the territories." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Necessity, Mr. Holt. My father's investments failed and he took his own life. The scandal left me with few options in Boston society. I secured a position as a school teacher in a settlement near Sacramento." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "That takes courage, Miss Donovan, leaving everything you know." "Not as much courage as raising 3 children alone in the wilderness," she countered. He leaned against the porch post, studying her in the fading light. "About that, I've been thinking all afternoon about a proposition for you." Grace raised an eyebrow, suddenly wary. "A proposition? Not what you're thinking," he hastened to add. "Something honorable. You see, I've been watching you with my children, how you knew just what to do with Lily, how you made something out of nothing for supper, how Jamie and Daniel took to you right away." "They're wonderful children," Grace said, unsure where this was heading. Hayes took a deep breath. "Miss Donovan, Grace, I'm not a man to beat around the bush. My children need a mother, I need a wife. Someone to help raise them proper, to make this house a home again." Grace stared at him, speechless. "I know it's sudden," he continued, words tumbling out faster now. "We just met today, but I'm a good man, Grace, I work hard. The ranch will turn around. I've got some fine horses nearly ready for market. I can provide for you, for all of us." "Mr. Holt," Grace finally managed, "are you proposing marriage to me? A woman you've known less than a day?" "I am." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Be their mama, Grace." "Be my wife, before that sun sets completely," Grace gasped. "Today, you can't possibly be serious, dead serious. Preacher Johnson's in town. We could ride back now, be married proper, and you'd sleep tonight knowing those children have a mother again." His expression softened. "I'm not asking for love, Grace. That might come later or it might not. But I'm offering you a home, a family that needs you, and I suspect you might need us too." Grace turned away, her thoughts in turmoil. This was madness. She had plans, a position waiting for her. She couldn't possibly marry a stranger, no matter how compelling his blue eyes or how sweet his children. And yet, the memory of little Lily's weight in her arms, of Daniel's solemn assistance with the dishes, of Jamie's enthusiastic storytelling, it all tugged at something deep within her. The position in California was with strangers too, in a town she'd never seen. And Hayes was right about one thing: she did need somewhere to belong. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked quietly, still facing the sunset. "What if we find we can't abide each other after a week?" Hayes moved to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Then I'll pay for your stage ticket to California myself. No hard feelings. But Grace," and here he gently turned her to face him, "I don't think that will happen. I'm a fair judge of character, had to be in my line of work, and you're a good woman with a kind heart. That's all I need to know." Grace looked up into his face, searching for any sign of deception or ill intent. She found only honesty, hope, and perhaps a trace of the same loneliness that had been her companion these many months. "This is absolutely mad," she whispered. A smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Most worthwhile things in life are a little mad, Miss Donovan." "The children would need to agree," she stipulated, hardly believing she was entertaining the idea. "Let's ask them." He offered his arm, as proper as any Boston gentleman. Inside, the children looked up from their book, curiosity evident in their young faces. "Jamie, Daniel," Hayes began, his voice gentle but serious. "How would you feel if Miss Donovan stayed with us, if she became your new mother?" Jamie's eyes widened. "For true, Pa, she'd stay forever, if she agrees to marry me, yes." Daniel's expression was more cautious. "Would you make more stew and fix Lily when she cries?" Grace knelt to be at eye level with the boys. "I would do my very best to take care of all of you. I can't replace your mother, I wouldn't try to, but I would love you as if you were my own." Jamie threw his arms around Grace's neck, nearly knocking her over. "Say yes, please say yes." Daniel approached more slowly, his small hand touching her sleeve. "You wouldn't leave? Even when it's hard?" Grace's heart broke a little at the uncertainty in his voice. How many people had these children lost or been left by? "I would not leave, Daniel. When things are hard, that's when families stick together most of all." The 7-year-old nodded solemnly, then joined his brother in embracing her. Over their heads, Grace met Hayes' gaze. "Well, Miss Donovan?" he asked softly. "The sun's getting mighty low." Grace took a deep breath. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Yes, Mr. Holt, I will marry you before sunset." The ride back to town was a blur of excitement and disbelief. Jamie chattered endlessly about having a new mother, while Daniel held sleeping Lily and occasionally asked practical questions that made Grace smile. Hayes drove the wagon with a steady hand, glancing at Grace frequently as if to reassure himself she was still there, still agreeing to his outlandish proposal. Preacher Johnson was found at the town's small church, initially skeptical about performing such a hasty ceremony until Hayes explained the circumstances. The older man's expression softened as he observed Grace with the children. "Are you entering into this union of your own free will, Miss Donovan?" he asked privately while Hayes settled the children in a pew. "I am," Grace confirmed. "It's unconventional, I know, but love has its own timeline," the preacher finished for her. "And these children need a mother's love." The ceremony itself was simple but dignified. Grace wore her best traveling dress, a dark blue that brought out the gold in her brown eyes. Hayes had somehow procured a small bouquet of wildflowers, presenting them to her with a shy smile that transformed his rugged face. As they stood before Preacher Johnson, Hayes took her hands in his. His were calloused and strong, enveloping hers completely. When it came time for the vows, his voice was clear and firm, promising to honor and protect her all the days of his life. Grace's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated the ancient promises, acutely aware of the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Behind them, Jamie fidgeted while Daniel watched with solemn eyes, Lily still sleeping in his arms. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Johnson declared as the last rays of sun slanted through the church windows. "Mr. Holt, you may kiss your bride." Hayes hesitated, his gaze questioning. Grace gave a slight nod and he leaned down, brushing his lips against hers in a kiss that was gentle but sent unexpected warmth coursing through her. "We did it, Pa. We got a new ma before the sun went down, just like you said." Jamie's exuberant voice broke the moment, bringing laughter from the adults. They signed the marriage certificate, Grace's new name Grace Holt looking strange in her familiar handwriting. Preacher Johnson's wife appeared with a small cake she'd hurriedly prepared upon hearing the news, and they celebrated with the impromptu feast in the church hall. As darkness fell, they made their way back to the wagon. Mrs. Johnson had insisted on keeping the children overnight to give the newlyweds some privacy, an arrangement that brought a flush to Grace's cheeks but relief as well. There would be time enough to ease into her role as mother. Tonight, she needed to come to terms with being a wife. The ride back to the homestead was quiet, a companionable silence broken only by the sounds of the night and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they arrived, Hayes helped her down from the wagon, his touch lingering at her waist. "I'll tend to the horses," he said. "Make yourself at home, Mrs. Holt." Mrs. Holt. The name still felt foreign, like a garment that hadn't been broken in yet. Inside the cabin, Grace lit lamps and built up the fire, moving about the space with new eyes, the eyes of its mistress rather than a guest. There was so much to be done, so many small touches that would transform this functional space into a true home. But that was for tomorrow and the days that followed. When Hayes returned, he stood awkwardly by the door for a moment before crossing to where she sat by the fire. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her, lowering himself to the chair opposite. "I'm not expecting anything from you that you're not ready to give. The room Martha and I shared is yours now. I can sleep out here until whatever time you decide otherwise." The consideration in his offer touched Grace deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not many men would be so patient." Hayes shrugged. "I want this to work, Grace. For the children, yes, but for us too. I think we could have a good life together if we give it a chance to grow natural-like." "I would like that as well." She hesitated, then added, "Though I confess I know very little about ranch life, I may not be the help you're expecting." He smiled, the firelight catching the gold in his beard. "You'll learn. And you already know the most important things: how to care for little ones, how to make a meal stretch, how to bring light into a room just by being in it." Grace felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You're a poet, Mr. Holt." "Hayes," he corrected. "And no, just a man who sees clearly what's before him." They talked late into the night, learning each other's histories in broad strokes. Hayes had come west as a young man, worked as a ranch hand until he saved enough to buy his own small spread. He'd met Martha at a church social, married her within months, and begun building their family. Her loss had nearly broken him, but the children needed him to continue. Grace shared more about her life in Boston, her father's business, her mother's social aspirations, the music lessons and finishing school that had prepared her for a life so different from the one she now found herself embracing. She spoke of the scandal and heartbreak of her father's suicide, the whispers and cut direct from former friends, the desperate search for a position that would take her far from painful memories. "Their loss is our gain," Hayes said simply when she'd finished. "Though I'm sorry for your suffering." As the fire died down to embers, Grace found herself stifling yawns. "You're exhausted," Hayes observed, rising from his chair. "Let me show you to your room." The bedroom was small but neat, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a small dresser with a mirror. A child's cradle stood in one corner, awaiting Lily's return. "I'll bring your trunk in tomorrow," Hayes promised. "For tonight I found one of Martha's nightgowns that might fit you." He pointed to a folded garment on the bed, then back toward the door. "Sleep well, Grace, and thank you for taking a chance on us." Left alone, Grace changed into the borrowed nightgown, which was indeed a reasonable fit. As she brushed out her hair, she caught her reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes brighter, her expression more settled than it had been in months. She had a husband now, children, a home, all acquired in the space of a single extraordinary day. Grace slept deeply that night, waking to the unfamiliar sounds of a rooster crowing and cattle lowing in the distance. For a moment, she was disoriented, then memory rushed back. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, pinning her hair in a simple style that would be practical for the day's work. She found Hayes already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked up when she entered, his expression warming. "Good morning, Mrs. Holt. Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," she admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "When will you collect the children?" "Thought we'd ride in after breakfast. There's something I'd like to show you first, though." Curious, Grace followed him outside after they'd eaten. The morning was glorious, the air still cool but promising heat later in the day. Hayes led her toward the barn, where he showed her the horses he was training, magnificent animals with powerful lines and intelligent eyes. "These two are nearly ready for market," he explained, patting a chestnut gelding. "Should bring a good price. Enough to get us through the winter comfortably and invest in some improvements for the place." Grace recognized what he was doing, showing her that his promises of provision weren't empty, that there was a future here beyond the immediate needs that had prompted his proposal. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "You have a gift with them." Pride straightened his shoulders. "Been working with horses since I was Jamie's age. It's in my blood." As they walked back toward the house, Hayes stopped suddenly. "Almost forgot, got something for you." From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. I know it's not fancy, but it's perfect," Grace interrupted, extending her left hand. Hayes slid the ring onto her finger, his touch sending that now familiar warmth through her. It fit as if made for her. "I want to do right by you, Grace," he said earnestly. "I know this isn't the marriage you dreamed of as a girl, but I promise to be a good husband, to respect you and provide for you, to be faithful and true." Grace looked up at him, this man who was now her husband, his honest blue eyes, the strength in his sun-browned face, the gentle way he held her hand. "And I promise to be a good wife to you, Hayes. To care for your children as my own, to make our house a home, to stand beside you through whatever comes." They sealed this second, more private exchange of vows with another kiss, longer and less hesitant than the one in the church. When they drew apart, Hayes rested his forehead against hers for a moment. "We should go get our children," he said, and the simple phrase filled Grace's heart to overflowing. The children were overjoyed to see them, rushing to Grace with enthusiastic hugs as if she'd been gone for weeks instead of overnight. Lily reached for her without hesitation, a development that brought tears to Grace's eyes. "She knows her mama," Mrs. Johnson observed with a knowing smile. The first weeks of marriage were a whirlwind of adjustment. Grace set about organizing the household, creating routines that brought order to what had been chaos. Hayes worked from dawn to dusk with the horses and cattle, coming in each evening to a hot meal and a home that grew more comfortable by the day. They were still shy with each other in private, the newness of their relationship a delicate thing they both protected. Hayes continued to sleep on a pallet in the main room, though their goodnight kisses grew progressively longer and more tender. The children flourished under Grace's care. Jamie's wild energy found constructive outlets in the tasks she assigned him. Daniel's serious nature softened with the security of consistent affection, and Lily began to thrive, gaining weight and mastering new skills daily. A month after their wedding, Hayes sold his trained horses for an excellent price. True to his word, he invested some of the money in improvements to the ranch, repairs to the barn, additional fencing for the expanded herd, and a water pump that saved Grace countless trips to the well. But he also insisted on gifts for his new family fabric for curtains and clothing, a rocking chair for the porch, a proper crib for Lily, and books for the boys. For Grace, he bought a delicate silver hairbrush with matching hand mirror. "So you can see how beautiful you are," he told her when she protested such an extravagance. The night after their shopping expedition in town, as Grace sat brushing her hair before bed, Hayes appeared in the bedroom doorway. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low. Grace nodded, suddenly nervous. They had been married 6 weeks, yet in many ways were still strangers. Hayes crossed to where she sat, gently taking the brush from her hand. "Let me," he said, and began to draw the brush through her long hair with careful strokes. "My mother used to do this for me," Grace murmured, closing her eyes at the pleasant sensation. "I used to do it for Martha," Hayes admitted. "She said it was the most relaxing thing in the world." The mention of his first wife no longer stung as it once had. Grace had come to understand that Martha would always be part of their family story, and that was as it should be. She was right, Grace agreed. When he had brushed her hair until it shone, Hayes set the brush down and moved to kneel before her. "Grace," he said, taking her hands in his, "I've been patient because I wanted to give you time, but I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you. May already be past falling, truth be told." His eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I know it's not what we agreed to. We said this was a practical arrangement. But watching you with the children, seeing how you've made this house a home again, getting to know the woman you are inside, I can't help it. I love you, Grace Holt." Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected and overwhelming. "Oh, Hayes," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. It happened so fast, and I thought perhaps I was just grateful for the security for the children, but it's more than that, so much more. You love me too." The hope in his voice nearly broke her heart. In answer, Grace leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all the growing emotion of the past weeks into the gesture. Hayes responded immediately, gathering her close, his strong hands gentle on her back. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "Be my wife in truth, Grace. Let me stay with you tonight and all the nights to come." "Yes," she said simply, and took his hand to lead him to their bed. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Grace marveled at the strange, wonderful path her life had taken. From Boston society to a small ranch in Arizona territory. From a woman alone to a wife and mother. From uncertainty to belonging. "Penny for your thoughts," Hayes murmured against her hair. "I was just thinking how grateful I am that I took that shortcut through Dry Creek, that I was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to meet a cowboy with 3 hungry kids who needed a mother before sunset." Hayes chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear where it rested on his chest. "Fate has mysterious ways, indeed it does." Grace propped herself up to look at him, her husband, this man who had become her heart's home. "I love you, Hayes Holt, you and our children. I can't imagine any life but this one now." "Nor can I," he replied, drawing her down for another kiss. "And that, Mrs. Holt, is the greatest blessing of all." 1 year later, Grace stood on the porch of their ranch house, expanded now with 2 new rooms added during the summer, watching Hayes teach Jamie to rope a practice target in the yard. Daniel sat nearby, whittling with the small knife Hayes had given him for his 8th birthday, while Lily toddled after a butterfly, her dark curls bouncing with each step. Inside, dinner was cooking a hearty stew with vegetables from the thriving garden Grace had planted in the spring. Fresh bread cooled on the windowsill, and an apple pie waited for dessert. Grace's hand rested on the slight swell of her belly, where their newest family member grew. Hayes had wept with joy when she told him, gathering her in an embrace so tender it brought tears to her own eyes. The ranch was prospering under Hayes' skilled management and Grace's careful stewardship of their resources. They had weathered challenges: a late frost that threatened the garden, a bout of illness that swept through the family in winter, the occasional difficult horse that tested Hayes' training abilities but faced each one together. "Mama, look." Lily called, toddling toward her with chubby hands outstretched. "Pee-wetty." Grace knelt to examine the pebble her daughter had found, exclaiming over its sparkly surface with appropriate enthusiasm. Hayes looked up from his roping lesson, catching Grace's eye with a smile that still made her heart skip. In it was all the love, partnership, and promise that had grown between them since that fateful day when a proper Boston lady had taken shelter behind a water trough with a dusty Arizona cowboy. "I love you," he mouthed silently across the yard. "And I love you," she returned, certain to her soul that no teaching position in California could have given her what she'd found here: a family, a purpose, and a love that had blossomed from the most unexpected of beginnings. Some might call their story unconventional, even foolhardy. But as Grace watched her family in the golden light of the setting sun, the same sun that had witnessed their hasty vows a year ago, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The day was ending much as that life-changing one had with a sunset over the Arizona mountains. But unlike that day, when she'd been a stranger thrust into an impossible decision, today Grace Holt was home, surrounded by the family she loved, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the maddest decisions led to the greatest happiness of all.